amid all of this trade war hysterics coming mainly from the Trump administration, the Financial Times shared what should be alarming both to the Trump administration and for perhaps the U.S. economic elite as a whole, where China's treasury holdings of U.S. treasury bonds has been sinking for quite some time. And in 2010, China was the undisputed number one holder of U.S. treasuries. Now, its holdings of U.S. treasuries is below that of the United Kingdom. And of course, this comes amid, Professor Wolff, if you want to begin, this never-ending trade war, which of course is now in high gear as the Trump administration, unsurprisingly, is focusing mainly on countries in Asia and China's periphery. So, Professor Wolff, what is your reaction to this development and its overall impact on the U.S. economic situation and position in the world?
Well, my reaction is quite similar to that of most of the things that Mr. Trump's government is now doing. I see it as primarily designed for the political success he hopes it will have domestically here in the United States. His position as president is shakier now than it has been since he took the oath of office half a year ago. His polling numbers reflect that. The desperation with which he is casting about for almost anything that can distract the public from the issues that are driving down his popularity. And those issues are inflation, which, while it is still not serious, is ongoing and looking like it will speed up in the second half of the year, which is very, very bad news for him. The fact that he didn't bring, as he had promised, the war in Ukraine to an end, and on the contrary, it seems to be getting worse, that he's initiated a whole new war in Iran, that he has done nothing to stop the horrors of Gaza and the Middle East. And now he's caught up in a scandal in which the promised transparency of his government is clearly upended by the fact that they're trying to hide everything having to do with the pedophile financier, Jeffrey Epstein. So he is in very bad trouble, and he is casting about for almost anything that can look at least a little positive or at least a little moving in the direction he had promised. To give you one final example, over the last 2 days, he has effectively and literally accused President Obama of treason, which is a crime punishable by death in the United States. It is very extraordinary, to say the least, for a president. I'm not sure it's ever happened in American history, for a president to suggest, let alone to declare, a prior president, especially one still living, to have committed a treasonous crime. You only would do that if you're desperate to distract. So the deal with Japan, announced a few hours ago, which looks good, is another effort to suggest, well, I'm at least succeeding somewhere over here in getting countries to submit to tariffs that are higher than what they used to have, higher than what people thought they ever would agree to. And here it is, I can claim that I agreed to it. I think that's the way to understand this. I'm not clear why the Japanese went along with it, except, of course, their government has its own crisis to deal with now. And a final point, it is not uncommon in international dealings for there to be not only the signing of official documents, but also the signing of secret documents that are not made public for a long time. I think it would be wise for everyone to keep in reserve at least the question Were other things done or given to Japan in this case to help it make a decision to sign the official agreement to a tariff as high as they agreed to?
Could you talk about the significance of what it means for China to be letting go of U.S. treasuries at the rate that it has over this last several years, and especially in the last couple of years and under the Trump administration? What does it mean, and why is it significant?
I think China now is under no illusions that the Trump regime, even the Biden administration, and the entire US as a whole is out to get them. You know, China used to work on the old order of vendor financing, right? They would sell a lot of stuff to the US. The US would then send them dollars, and then the dollars will get recycled back into US Treasury bonds. And that is how the old world order used to be. So there are two things that Trump is actually doing that is breaking this entire recycling scheme on. Now, the first thing, when Trump decides to impose a 30% tariff on China on top of whatever existing tariffs there are, and in some products, we are looking at 70, 80, or even 100%. So suddenly China they are going to lose a lot of revenue over the next year, 5 years, 10 years. So a lot of money earnings from the US is going to drop. Now, if we look at the trade, the exports of China all the way to the US, it has dropped anywhere from 20 to 30% in aggregate and 40% in some categories. So now China is earning less dollars. So as a consequence, right now they have less money to invest back into US Treasury bonds. And what's really the point of holding US debt? Now, firstly, as we all know, the dollar has been dropping. It has lost around 8 to 10% of its value. So just on an economic fiscal standpoint, it's not a good investment, right? Who knows how much more it will drop over the next 3 to 5 years. And secondly, China has seen what has happened to the enemies of the US, more specifically, what has happened to the Russian reserves. Now, this is something that we cannot take lightly. And when the US, under the Biden administration, went in and took away around $300 billion worth of Russian sovereign assets, this was a big wake-up call to everyone, not just China, but the BRICS as a whole. So right now, China has very important questions that has to be answered, right? Yes, they're making a lot of money. Their trade surplus is around $1 trillion a year. And where are they going to put their money into? And that's why over the last, I think since December 2024, China has been aggressively increasing their gold stockpiles because it's a neutral asset. And we can see China going out there in the world, buying up a lot of physical resource mineral mines, because that is hard assets that at the end of the day can't be debased by US fiscal spending, the out of control spending by Washington. And in another sense, we have to understand that every dollar that China doesn't recycle back into US assets is money denied to the treasury market, denied to US equities, that actually adds more pressure on this entire system. And the US economy is a very hyper financialized network of gears, so to speak. So as we can see over the past 6 months, when the tariff war just started, it caused a lot of chaos to happen. Bond yields started to skyrocket, and that itself caused Trump to push the panic button and enact a 90-day pause, if I'm not wrong. So China, I'm not saying that China's out there dumping treasuries to crash the US economy, but the weakness of the US economy is a byproduct of its inherent weakness. China knows this, a lot of countries knows this, and by getting out of treasury bonds, well, it's no love lost for them if the US economy starts to tank as a consequence of that.
A lot of these policies that are supposedly economic in nature, for example, the trade war, has backfired dramatically. What's your assessment?
Well, I think that in the long run, this is an unmitigated disaster. I'll say a few words about it in a moment. In the short run, and I think that's what's going on, in the short run, he's desperate for political points, and you're getting behavior that goes with that. He's looking for whatever agreement he can get, whether it's with Japan or the Philippines or Vietnam or whatever it is, that can make it look like he's getting what he was out there for, can stoke up his image as a powerful leader who can bully the rest of the world to go on. But let's take a look at what underlies the bullying, because that's the longer run. And the longer run is, I think the way to look at this is as follows. The United States has serious economic difficulties, and it is an empire in decline. And those two things end up meaning that this empire, to slow its own decline, is willing to sacrifice the relationships it had with many, many other countries. And it is willing to do that in a stark and kind of unforgiving way that is teaching all of those countries, friendly, neutral, hostile, teaching them a lesson they have to acknowledge. And the same is true for other corporations, companies, capitalists in all these different countries. You can't do business with the United States the way you once thought you could. The tariff shows you that. The insistence on a tariff shows you that. The threat, which has been articulated by Mr. Trump repeatedly, that if you're a country that retaliates to the tariff imposed or the tariff increase imposed by the United States, well, then we will hit you again by raising the tariff in a kind of escalating procedure. We are going to hurt you economically if we can. Yes, it's American companies importing all this stuff that have to pay the tax. But we all know, if we do a little bit of economics, that those companies that face a rising cost because they have to give Uncle Sam a tariff for everything they bring in, they will do everything in their power to reduce, shift, get rid of this extra cost, just like they would with every other cost that they encounter and that they've always done. So here's the things they will do. They will push it forward, charge the final consumer a higher price. That's one way to relieve the burden on you. And the other one is to go back to the source country from whom you buy and try to get them to give you a lower price so that they absorb the tariff. But Mr. Trump's problem is, either way, however each company does it, he will lose. He will get hostility from the rest of the world, and he will get a loss of support from his own consumer public base. He's caught. This is not a solution except in the posture of what he's doing, because if you've noticed, he likes to talk about tariffs as if the victim of them was unilaterally, obviously, and totally the country of origin, which is not only bad economics, but is in the short run, even in the short run, a very short-term advantage until people pay the higher prices, or the hostility of other countries shows up in the fact that they cut the United States out of their growth plans. And I know that that is happening from companies I'm associated with. That's already underway in many other parts of the world. And here's a footnote. The graph you showed us at the beginning, it's really unspeakable. The worst economy in Europe right now, by many measures, is the United Kingdom. For them to be accumulating dollar holdings when they are in desperate need of using those dollars to develop their own economy out of the hole into which it has sunk, is a screaming comment on the Starmer government and on the conservatives that went before. What a disaster that place has become.
Some of the nuts and bolts, for example, of Trump's latest trade deal with Japan, for example, because Japan is a very key cog in the U.S.'s overall strategy, which includes both economic and military war plans. And it appears Japan has just signed on to something that, as Donald Trump said in the beginning of my monologue, is big points that he's willing to give up for opening up to the United States. What exactly is happening there? How does it relate to the fact that China itself appears to be the target?
Now, if we look at the Japanese deal, right, it's a tragedy, it's a travesty. So the original plan Trump was going to impose on Japan was a 25% tariff. Now, if we look into the details of the deal, we can see that it's absolutely horrendous. Even though the tariff has dropped from 25% down to 15%, if we look and pick apart the entire deal, we can see that Japan is actually paying much more than they anticipated. Now, people in Washington, in Capitol Hill, Scott Bessent, they're all elated about the deal because Japan, in my humble opinion, is really on the back end of this. So what do we have? Tokyo has to buy an additional 100 Boeing planes. Well, why? To help Trump's favorite company stay afloat. Now, in addition to that, which is quite hilarious, they have to buy more American rice and spend like $10 billion more in US food imports. The defense contracts with the American military industrial complex will increase by at least $3 billion. And there's another aspect of the Japanese deal which is actually very outstanding for the US and astounding for me just to realize. Japan is going to set up a kind of fund to invest $500 billion into the US economy. So we can see that Trump, the US administration, they're doing their very best to squeeze their allies of their capital, of their money, so that the US can essentially escape scot-free from their problems. Now, as what Richard Wolff said, right, it's true that it's going to backfire down the road. What you're doing is that you're squeezing your allies, you're squeezing countries around the world, you're using economic policy to influence statecraft. And this is going to build up a lot of hatred, a lot of resentment around the world, and it's going to backfire. Just look at the situation in Europe. You know, a lot of people over there, they are reducing their purchase of Tesla cars. There's a soft boycott going on of US products. And when we shift our attention to Asia, sooner or later, we'll be able to see countries from Japan, even South Korea, they'll be moving more of their business, more of their partnerships to the BRICS, because BRICS, well, they're going to be a growing bloc over the next 5 to 10 years, 20 years, even beyond that. And just think about it in a very simple way. So Japan, they will need to sell to the US at a 15% tariff, right? We all know that the majority of the tariff will be absorbed by the American people. Companies will pass down the additional cost to consumers. But there's going to be quite a few companies in Japan who will have to eat some of the tariffs as well, right? I mean, a 15% tariff is very punitive when you consider big Japanese car brands like Toyota, Nissan, Honda, their margins are like 10 to 15% at best. So their profits are going to come down. And the only way for Japan, maybe South Korea, once they sign the deal, which I reckon is going to be quite horrible as well, is to bring down their cost of production. And the only other outlet they can go to is China. And it's quite fascinating when we see, the trade flows of China, their exports to the US is going down, but on aggregate, everything is going up. And why is that the case? That's because other countries in the world, whether they like China or not, whether it's the Europeans, whether it's the Middle East, whether it's some American companies themselves, they need to trade with China to bring down their manufacturing costs. Because if they don't, their profits are going to collapse, layoffs are going to happen, American consumers, they'll be facing higher prices, and that really delivers a cascading effect to the US economy. So Trump's tariff war is punitive not just to the world, not just the US allies, it's helping China. In fact, but it's more or less destroying the US economy in real time.
Yeah, just another point to what Sean has said.
Yeah.
Every government in the world, I don't think there's a single exception where they have, which almost every government does, domestic economic difficulties of one kind or another, with their exports, with their imports, with their financial situation, with their unemployment. Every leader will now be able to say to his or her own people, yes, we are having difficulty, blame the Americans. Because what the Americans are doing is making things more difficult for everybody. And so there's enough plausibility, it'll be an exaggeration, but it'll be an exaggeration based on something that is real, that is in the newspapers all the time, that they know about, hear about. And what you're therefore doing is, it's not that you're not doing so-called soft power, the way they used to call this. You are undoing half a century of soft power. You are transforming the United States from the interesting place where you can buy, jeans or clothing or movies or all the elements of ideological transformation are now being put in reverse. The United States is becoming a villain. The stories of treating the immigrants the way they are, or for that matter, people who aren't immigrants have to worry when they arrive at an American airport, what will happen to them. All of this is a process in which you are undoing the position of the United States. And that's going to hurt American exports in a major way. It's going to have all kinds of consequences. Scientists leaving one part of the world and moving their careers to another. I could go on. We're seeing it already starting. And this is this is so stark that it makes me wonder that the level of anxiety about the conditions here in the United States among the people at the top may be much more advanced than we know, because they work very hard not to have us see what the problem is. And so even we are taken in with our critical approach not to see just how bad this situation. Otherwise, why would they do this?